Hello, welcome to the News Tech Makers, a podcast where we talk about at-scale application development, deployment, and management. Thanks for joining us today. This is Swapnil Bhartia for the News Tech, and we are here at KubeCon Austin, Texas. Let's meet today's guest.
I'm Dianne Marsh. I am the Director of Engineering for the Engineering Tools team at Netflix. And what that means is that my team builds the self-service tools that all of the engineers use at Netflix to pretty much take their code and ideas through the entire workflow all the way through to deployment.
I saw your keynote yesterday where you talked about how technology can influence culture and culture can influence technology within a company. But before we get into that question, I should not mention it, but I will. I just binge-watched Stranger Things and Sense8, and I'm curious that looking at the scale and the scope of Netflix, where millions of people are watching these, high-definition shows at the same time, there are some unique challenges for Netflix. So what kind of problems is your team trying to solve for Netflix? Can you talk about that a bit?
Right, so my team is responsible for building the tools that the other teams use for deploying their changes to the cloud. And this means that really we're at the pinnacle of solving the developer productivity problem, right? We want to make sure that all of the engineers at Netflix are able to work as fast and as responsibly fast as they want to work. If we don't give them enough context about what they're deploying or about what's going on in the ecosystem at large, then they could make they could cause big problems in the service. They could cause disruptions in the service. And so we've built a lot of guardrails into our tools that give context to our developers to help them make good choices. It's really important to us in the Netflix culture that we build guardrails rather than gates. It's really critical that we leave the decision, the responsibility for the decision at the developers themselves, because they know and understand their service better than anyone else. If we build gates, we actually might prevent someone from fixing something in an emergency or making it more difficult. And we feel like that's more dangerous than giving them the ability to make a mistake in the event that they do that. So we really want to provide them with the ability to weigh the risks and the rewards and make the right decision.
I loved that guardrail versus gates approach, and I think more and more organizations should follow that approach and provide more freedom to their employees. But during your keynote, you also mentioned that you don't stop people from jumping the guardrails, which means that there is some risk involved. And that becomes even riskier when there are different teams working on different projects, serving the same common goal of Netflix. So how do you ensure that despite this freedom, there is some kind of integration within these teams?
One of the ways that one of the guiding principles at Netflix is that we need to be loosely coupled but highly aligned. And this means that the teams themselves own the responsibility of communicating with other teams about what they're doing and what impact they might have on someone else. So with microservices, we're all doing something that's fairly well constrained in terms of doing one thing and doing it well and deploying that independently. But it's important for us to understand the impact that we have on the greater ecosystem. So the pipelines in Spinnaker, which is what I used as an example of how we're building culture into our tools, Spinnaker gives those teams the ability to be able to go through various stages to ensure confidence along the way that they're going to be deploying something that's an improvement rather than a regression to the service. So the tools really try to give context to our developers so that they can make those good choices, but we really try hard not to get in the way of anything that they might do.
And Spinnaker came out of Netflix, right?
Spinnaker is an open source, continuous delivery and infrastructure management platform. It was built at Netflix. It was designed at Netflix, but early on we decided that we wanted to meet some objectives, and some of those objectives were we wanted this to be multi-cloud and we wanted it to be a pluggable architecture.
Right.
There are some reasons why we made those choices. The predecessor to Spinnaker was called Asgard, and it was a highly effective delivery tool, a deployment tool. but it didn't provide us the ability to be very extensible with the product, which meant that the developers on the Asgard project itself had to make all of the changes to the product for Netflix. Sure, we could take pull requests, but it wasn't very easy to contribute into the project. Also, it was really built for one region in Amazon. And when we put it out in open source, other companies decided to add in different cloud providers. But what happened was, because it wasn't very extensible for cloud providers, it wasn't built to be multi-cloud, that led to really a fragmentation in the Asgard source code and in the project, where people would fork it, but it wasn't really easy for them to bring that technology back in, and so we lost the innovation that those other companies did on those forks. So it was really important to us to think about how we might make this an extensible platform that didn't need to be forked, and that we could work with the community rather than throwing something out there that the community might adopt, but then not figure out how to be able to contribute back.
Right. So is it like a project? I mean, I do see that a lot of other companies are involved with it, but is it like project maintained by Netflix, or are you planning to give it to some organization like CNCF or something else, or what is the?
Yeah, so Netflix is the sort of leader for this project, and we work really closely with the community on it. Google is a big contributor to the project, as is Microsoft, Pivotal, Target, and most recently Oracle. There are a lot of companies that are contributing into the software project.
Right.
We have a vibrant community with regular check-ins with that community to make sure that all of the contributors know the future direction for Spinnaker. We have some check-ins with the leaders of the big contributors, so that we can stay aligned about what their objectives are as well.
No, but like what we have seen a history with Kubernetes also, when a project is like kind of led by a company, there's some kind of mistrust or whatever, how the whole community works. So that's why most of the projects find a way in third party neutral organization. So do you have any plans?
We have a big open source effort at Netflix,
okay.
And I think that we've built a lot of trust in the community that we support our open source effort.
Yeah, so can you talk about what kind of other open source work you're doing at Netflix? Because that could be a
Sure, I think there are 45 odd projects if you go to the Netflix open source page on GitHub.
Okay.
And they range from small utilities to big projects, with Spinnaker probably being the one of the biggest.
Biggest, yeah.
Yeah, but there are many there. I think it would be interesting for people to go and check that out, and they might see other things that they either use today, like Hystrix, or that they have used for service discovery, like Eureka. All of those things are pretty well used in the industry.
Okay, and what kind of challenge is there for a company like Netflix to kind of invest resources, in managing these projects, which is being used by the wider ecosystem?
So Netflix, So Netflix is really interested in supporting the project overall, but our focus has always been on making a great development environment, a great continuous delivery and infrastructure management platform for Netflix developers to use. And so while this project is multi-cloud, we have not done any work toward providing other cloud providers. We've enabled that. We've worked closely with Google and Microsoft, for example, on making sure that they had the ability to contribute those cloud providers into the project. But we really focus on Netflix's interest. That's our focus.
Right, because the way Netflix moves so fast, you cannot really wait for a community to. Sometimes it becomes too hard to get consensus on things, and then you end up patching everything and creating your own internal debt. It happens sometime, right? So. Has Netflix been pro open source very early on, or did some change happen at some point where?
The Netflix open source effort is led from a grassroots standpoint. No manager, director, VP ever tells a team to open source something. That commitment comes from the developers themselves, from the teams themselves, and that's a reflection of the fact that the increased load being put on a team from being out in open source, the responsibility is that you're managing pull requests and that you're managing the project in a responsible way. That load is being borne by the people who are on the team, not by the managers of that team or the leaders of an organization. And so the team themselves have to decide if this is something that they want to take on. We support that as managers in the areas where it's not Netflix secret sauce, right? So engineering tools is a great place for us to be able to contribute tooling into the open source community, because that's not the innovation that Netflix is offering to our subscribers, right? So we're the teams that work in areas where we have secret sauce are much more sensitive to being able to put things out in open source than teams like mine, which we can be pretty open about it.
Yeah, but you have a mix of secret sauce and open source component. So and there can be a lot of legal issues, because open source licensing can be different. And sometimes you may put something in open source which Netflix has an IP on. So is there a legal process or some system internally so the developers, they are not worried that okay, I'm either taking the code or putting the code and suddenly I have to talk to a lawyer. So is there any process internally so that developers can freely work on it?
We have very little process at Netflix. You might be surprised at how our legal team works or how our security team works. They like I said about tooling, about guardrails, not gates. They really serve to give us counsel about what their best advice is, but they try really hard not to stand in the way.
Okay.
And so oftentimes people will consult with lawyers to talk about whether or not they're following a great license for open source or things like that. But our lawyers don't stand in the way of us open sourcing software. They really work with us on that. And I really appreciate that about our legal team.
I mean, when you look at the scale of Netflix, and soon, I'm thinking in the realm of science fiction, soon virtual reality and very, very heavy, intensive content will be coming, 4K is already there, 8K will be coming in. What kind of challenges are there, which you still see? These are the big challenges that are, facing us for us developer to deliver those content, without any interruption.
Yeah, so my team is not responsible for managing the encoding or managing anything about devices. So those challenges are another team's responsibility.
Okay.
I think that what's fantastic about working at Netflix is the visibility that we get into the interesting challenges that other people are solving. But I'm not really able to talk about any of those things here. I can only talk about the challenges that my team faces, which continue to be amazing and continue to keep me invigorated and excited about my job. And we face some really interesting challenges, I think, as an industry, where at conferences like KubeCon, everybody here is so interested in the underlying technology, and we're rightfully talking about the underlying technology that goes into the tooling that we build. When we go back, to our teams and we try to construct solutions, we'll use that knowledge gained from the underlying infrastructure that we got here. But when we talk about it with other developers, I think we need to be mindful of the fact that they're solving these very interesting challenges that you just described. They're solving challenges around personalization or big data or how to do some really great encoding. And we need to remember that they're not that interested in the details of our infrastructure and what particularly goes into solving that problem. So they want to know what the results, what the value that our tools bring, rather than talking about how we got it done. And so I think it's great for us to talk about that stuff here. But when we go back to our teams, we want to be really mindful of the fact that they want to solve business problems. They want to work in their domain, and we should be doing whatever we can to ease their deployments, to ease their workload in the area of deployment from my team specifically, by not talking about the underlying infrastructure and instead really giving them great abstractions and constructs to work with.
One of the key points of your talk yesterday that I loved was how culture influences technology and how technology influences culture. Can you elaborate a bit on that
I
point?
think what's really interesting is that when you think about tools that you're going to build, you need to be really mindful of the culture of your company. Because what you're going to be doing is building tools that either complement that culture or challenge that culture. And depending on which approach you take, it's a different battle. So if you're complementing the culture, then you're being mindful of the culture that you're working in, like guardrails, not gates, or give context, not control, and keeping things open. Those are things that are important if you're complementing the culture. If you're challenging the culture, then you'll be working on sort of pushing a rock up a hill,
Right.
and you're going to spend a lot of time socializing why that's the right cultural change, and talking to other people about what that's going to look like in the organization and what the end game is, and why that's beneficial for the company. I think sometimes we build tools or we buy tools that we've evaluated, or we take them on out of open source, and we're not really mindful of the culture in which they were built, and we aren't prepared for that uphill battle that we're going to fight around acceptance of those tools, because the tools in our culture are not consistent. And I think that that's something that we haven't really talked about and we need to start thinking about.
You gave a great example of how Edge API team worked with the core team to solve some bigger problems. Can you talk about the kind of coordination, communication, and chemistry between different teams at Netflix that bind them all together?
What's really important at Netflix is the idea that we are openly transparent and deliberately transparent about what we're doing at all levels of the organization. And that means that teams need to spend time communicating. And so there is nothing, there is no shoving code under the door that you might have seen in previous jobs. I think that was a construct that we thought we could do many, many years ago.
Right.
It didn't work, right? At Netflix, it's even more important because we don't have any controls in place to prevent people from colliding in such a way. And so it's really important, and we all understand that part of the culture is great communication. One of the ways that we achieve this is that all of our engineers are on site in Los Gatos in a few buildings. And so we have a lot of face-to-face meetings, and this culture of being able to come together face-to-face really supports staying highly aligned while we're loosely coupled. And so this importance of loosely coupled means that the coordination between teams isn't as critical as you would expect. And we're really designed for that in the same way that microservices are designed for that.
Right.
You can often hear, right, that the design and architecture of your systems effectively mirrors that of your organization. And I think that's very true at Netflix.
Thanks, Dianne, a lot for your time today. I really appreciate it. And I look forward to meeting you again at some open source event in future. And now back to our audiences. Thanks for watching. Listen to more episodes of the News Tech Makers at thenewstech.io/podcasts. Please rate and review us on iTunes, like us on YouTube, and follow us on SoundCloud. Thanks for listening, and see you next time.